Hello everyone, my name is Frostbreak, and over the past month or so, I've been diving into Star Wars: The Old Republic. Today, I'd like to share my opinions and impressions of the game from the perspective of a first-time player. Please keep in mind, as the title says, I am a new player, so my opinions could be misguided or incorrect, however, they are still my opinions. If that is the case, please feel free to comment down below and correct me on anything I may get wrong. For the active players or veterans, I'm going to use this segment of the video to describe how much content I've completed, just to put the rest of the video in perspective. If you've never played SWTOR before, this portion probably isn't relevant to you. So, I've been playing the game for just over 1 month, and I've accumulated over 150 hours in the game. I have fully completed the storyline for the Sith Warrior, Inquisitor, and Agent. I have yet to complete a light side character, but I do have some light side characters I'm playing with regularly. I have almost 40% of the Steam achievements, as I do have quite a few low-level characters I mess around with. I did subscribe for 1 month as well, which means I had access to all the dungeons and DLC the game had to offer. I think I've played through almost every dungeon once, and have just finished the Shadow of Revan DLC storyline, or I am now on Zeost. And I've been using this storyline map on the Steam community page to help guide me through, so hopefully it's accurate. Okay, let's start talking about the game. So even though I'm 12 years late to the party, I've always heard SWTOR had unbelievable storytelling, and I'm here to say that's absolutely the case. All the 8 origins have completely unique 30 to 40 hour campaigns, and let that sink in for a second. That's like if Skyrim had a different main story depending on the race of your character. It's unbelievable, and I've never played an RPG with a story system like this. Everything is fully voice acted, from random NPCs to major story villains to even your own character. Rather than just talking to a static model, all the dialogue has cutscenes, which makes the storytelling much more impactful. Additionally, you have access to major choices in almost every main storyline conversation, some of which might only affect something in the moment, either your companion's opinion of you or a light side and dark side decision. However, other choices may have massive long-term repercussions that affect the story. I really enjoyed the system because it genuinely makes you pause and think, knowing that your actions could have real impact on the story later down the line. I won't spoil any of the campaigns or storylines, however, I think the Agent and the Sith Warrior were phenomenal. I know they are widely regarded as the best stories to do by the community, but I just wanted on record that I did also really enjoy them. There is easily 300 to 400 hours of free story content in this game, and if that's not a reason to try it, I don't know what is. The world. I mean, it's Star Wars. It's the second highest grossing franchise on the planet for a good reason. You can visit fan-favorite planets like Coruscant, Hoth, Yavin 4, and Tatooine, or maybe you just want something a little less popular like Korriban or Ilum. The point is, the world is Star Wars, which is a massive drive to its success. However, I do think it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. If this MMO was not under the Star Wars IP, I don't think it would be nearly as popular. The worlds are interesting in SWTOR and fun to explore, but a lot of that interest, at least for me, is from the movies. If I had never seen Star Wars, I don't think I would like this MMO as much. The world, unfortunately, is pretty empty content-wise. You're forced to explore all the planets of SWTOR during your character's main storyline, and during your time on the planets, if you go out to explore, there's lots of fantastic side quests, but it lacks a lot of interactable environments that are staples in regular MMOs. Simple things like little dungeons or delves, world bosses, treasure hunts, etc. The physical world or worlds of SWTOR by themselves, without using any of the major storylines for support, are generally pretty barren. The players. Speaking of barren, let's talk about the players of SWTOR. Outside of the starting zones, the fleet, and the DLC zones, you're not going to see many players. That's not to say there are zero, but 12 years after the game does lead to less people exploring through low-level worlds and doing decade-old content. When you are doing your main story, it's probably best for you to play it with a single-player mindset, almost like you're playing it offline. It is a different story when you do get to endgame where 90% plus of the player base is, but it's still something to consider. There's lots of NPCs walking around the world. You never feel like it's actually empty, but it is a rare occurrence when you run across another player doing their main storyline. Let's talk about the community for a second. Man, I have never felt so welcome asking questions or for help in a game before. These people are so nice, generous, and knowledgeable, it's kind of odd. Every time I asked for help, people would send me money or gifts or just try and help in any way they could. Huge shout out to Merc_I, who gave me 200 million credits, which was enough to set me up forever. After 150 hours of playtime, I do not have a single complaint against a single player throughout my entire time on this game. Everyone was just amazing. As far as content creators go, which I do think is an important category, content creators do tend to drive traffic towards the game, and they do help retain it as well with educational content. There aren't as much content creators compared to other MMOs. I ended up just basically binging a bunch of SWTORista. As far as I know, she is the largest SWTOR content creator that at least I came across who uploads educational content for new players. There might be larger content creators, but she was just the best for my current situation. And if you're willing to try out the game, I would recommend looking at her stuff as well. I will make sure to put that on screen and maybe put a link down below as well. To summarize, SWTOR has a dedicated community for sure. It's not necessarily a super popular MMO, but you'll still see players around, especially once you get to the endgame content. However, during your leveling process, you're probably not going to see anybody. The combat. So let's start by saying that talking about combat in general is always going to be extremely subjective. Some people, of course, are going to love it, and some people, of course, are going to hate it. So let me start off by saying the combat system is very vast and hard to understand as a new player. The first thing you do is you pick your origin. This determines which specialization you can pick, and then this determines which combat style you can pick. So you can see on screen now, if we look at something like the Smuggler, has 8 different specializations, and each of those 8 have 3 unique combat styles that have different abilities and different playstyles, which means this one origin, Smuggler, has 24 different classes effectively that you can pick. Not to mention, if you're a subscriber, you can add a new specialization that adds onto your default one. It starts to get crazy, and there's a bunch of ability trees and things you can basically pick and choose from different. It does get very overwhelming as a new player. But once you play for a little bit, you start to understand that there's a boatload of customization options for your characters and what abilities they will learn. It's a very difficult system to get a hold of, but once you do, you basically can design any character you want from the ground up, which I think is really awesome. Does take a while to learn, but it allows you to do whatever you'd like. So as I previously have mentioned, I have multiple characters, 6 or 7 characters, and the only character whose combat I thoroughly enjoyed and made it my main was the Madness Sorcerer. As I've said many times before, the story in this game is phenomenal, but as soon as it was over, I found myself more often than not creating a new character right away because I didn't like the combat of the previous one. So I'd do a full story playthrough, and if I didn't like the combat, I would just drop that character and make a new one. The only exception, as I said, was the Madness Sorcerer. I quite like that one. There's a pretty short global cooldown. Abilities generally have an instant cast time, and you are usually managing 20 plus abilities at a time. Madness Sorcerer has long cast times, which I appreciate. They're not necessarily super long, they're, 2 to 4 seconds, but it gives me a second to think about what to do next. SWTOR's combat, in my experience, is very spammy and very quick. On top of the fast combat, enemies are generally pretty beefy. In my experience, the weakest enemies on the starter planets can be one-shotted, but most enemies take a few hits before going down even at max level. The combat also isn't very hard due to your companion, which just keeps you permanently at full HP or does a lot of damage depending on how you spec it. This was a bit of a bummer for me because it makes major story bosses or the footage you're seeing in the background, which is an elite enemy, which should, make you struggle and give you the potential threat of dying, and it just wipes that challenge away, and it makes every combat encounter very easy. So from a new player perspective, SWTOR combat is fast, but you don't deal a lot of damage, and you also take very little damage. It's kind of fast and tedious, which is an odd combination. Due to the non-threatening and slow nature of combat, it would be cool if they had a new player blueprint that has 5 to 8 abilities maximum. It's very easy to get overwhelmed with rotations starting out, but I found reducing my ability bar to the bare essentials was pretty great, especially when I started. I did some of the Rise of the Hutt DLC with a friend of mine who's been playing since 2014, and I was easily able to keep up with him damage-wise, even after removing 75% of the abilities from my bar. So I get, in the sense of min-maxing, it's not going to be great, but especially because there's no threat to story content and story combat, you really can reduce your bar quite a bit and not feel like you're losing anything. And as I mentioned previously, SWTORista, who's a content creator that I watched a lot, she has a bunch of guides online for easy ability rotations for new players that only use 5 to 10 buttons. So if you're looking for something like that, I would recommend checking her out and looking at those guides. Finally, my last point for the combat system is that I think the weapons are pretty bland. There is zero difference. Let me say that again, just make sure that's clear. There is zero difference between using a single lightsaber, dual wield, double-edged, a staff, a vibro sword, etc. I have never played a game less than MMO where your weapon style has zero impact on your combat. Zero. Generally, dual-wield weapons attack faster but deal less damage, right? That's a general consensus. Two-handed weapons are slower but they deal more damage, and a one-handed is kind of best of both worlds. You know the drill, because most games have this system, and it adds an extra layer of diversity to the combat. But in SWTOR, your weapon means nothing. It's just cosmetic. That is a very weird system for me to get my head around, and I thought that was pretty bland. And that's just the fantasy of wielding lightsabers doesn't mean anything because they're all the same, which kind of sucks. The crafting/economy. So the crafting and the economy, more specifically, of SWTOR is a hot topic of debate. Let's start with crafting, which is a little less divisive. It's okay. One character cannot be a master crafter. If you like the fantasy of being able to craft everything and anything, you will not be able to achieve that in SWTOR on one character. You need to have alts, and if you're a free-to-play player, you need to have even more alts, so it's like 5 or 6 max level characters in order to craft everything. The crafting system itself, I actually think is pretty good. There's lots of different styles that you can make for absolutely free, and they look pretty cool on your character. I didn't get too deep into crafting specifically, however, I did do a lot of resource farming to make money on the auction house, and how crafting and resource farming works is basically you have your list of companions, and you send them out on missions, and they just do it for you. There's no real skill involved. You just send them out, they come back with the reward, or they fail their mission and you get nothing. So the crafting is pretty friendly. You can be doing a campaign mission, pop open your companions tab, send a couple on a mission, and you're good to go. So I kind of like that because it was kind of like an idle component that kind of grinds in the background. I kind of like that mechanic. But let's dive into the thick of it and talk about the economy, which is definitely a tender subject in Star Wars: The Old Republic. Basically, as far as I understand it, as I said, I am a new player, over the many years of the game being out, prices of items have skyrocketed. Something that may have cost 1 million credits back in 2014 might cost 200 to 300 million now. That wouldn't be much of an issue if it wasn't for the credit caps SWTOR has in place. If you're a free-to-play player right now, you can only hold 1 million credits, which back in the day, 2014, 2015, 2016, sure, that wouldn't have been a problem because a lot of stuff, expensive stuff, were floating around the $1 million range. But now you can see the background footage. I can't afford anything. All of these red numbers that are over 100 million, I just can't buy anything. Most armor sets, cosmetics, or mounts cost well over 10 million at minimum, and you're looking at crafting materials right now, which should be the cheapest things relatively on the market, and they are so expensive. The credit cap restrictions were obviously set in place, as I said, far before my time, back when it made sense, but they clearly do not hold up under the current market inflation. Not to mention, even paying subscribers have a credit cap of 1 billion, I believe, which makes really rare items hard to buy and just isn't much fun for anyone. So if you choose to not pay for the subscription, you should really get into crafting because you're not going to be able to buy anything from the auction house, at least anything of value. So in my opinion, as a new player, the crafting system is decent. It will do what needs to be done, but all the definitely endgame stuff is going to be way out of your price range and you will just not be able to afford it. The progression. The progression of SWTOR follows a typical MMO, something we all know and love. As you level up, you get more health, you do more damage, you unlock new abilities. Nothing new here. However, my hot take, and I don't really think it's a hot take, is that the gear you get from progressing, I personally felt was very weak. It was just bigger and bigger numbers. Now, specifically, I am talking about progressing, okay? I'm not talking about endgame content. I'm talking about as a new player, from going to level 1 to 50, the gear you get doesn't matter. It is just number, big number, better than small number. That's all it means, which is really, I hated it. I hated it. You might do a giant boss battle. Every story has a massive boss battle at the end, a super climactic epic fight, and you're usually going to get a piece of gear from that boss, something really cool and hyped up, either their weapon that has special abilities or they have like a really cool helmet, something like that. If you kill that boss and you pick up that item that you get from the end of your epic story, your 40-hour story, your reward is a weapon or piece of armor that does 3 more damage or has 3 more armor. It means nothing. It means literally nothing. It has no abilities. It doesn't stand out cosmetically. It's just boring. The gear has no flavor at all. There is nothing that makes any item unique in SWTOR during the progression stages, specifically, of the game besides on how it looks. Sometimes some items look pretty cool. Yeah, I will admit, there are some very cool cosmetics in this game that you can get from progression. However, the physical item doesn't do anything spectacular ever. So you might now be thinking, okay, he's heavily mentioning progression, that this gear is really bland during progression. You know, we make it to level 50, 60, 70, it's going to get better. And you know what? You're right, it does. But not for free-to-play players. There are 5 levels of gear in SWTOR. There is gray, green, blue, purple, yellow. As far as I have seen as a new player, the only gear that is interesting that has a gear set, you know, you equip 5 pieces, you get a bonus, or it's a legendary item or helmet that has a unique effect, are bound to purple and yellow. And guess what? If you don't pay for the game, if you don't pay every month, you can't equip purple and yellow items. So if you are a free-to-play player, the gear in this game is the worst I've ever seen. Bar none. It is the worst gear system I've ever seen. If you sub like I do, you can see maybe in the background, one of my characters does have legendary items, does have some gear set stuff. It's a little bit better, yes, if you pay for the sub. But as soon as you're free to play, you cannot equip these items. And we're going to talk about that later in the monetization category of this video. But I really want to vent about how bad and predatory the gear system is for free-to-play players. It is horrible. It's my least favorite part of this game, bar none. Now, on a more positive note about the progression system, SWTOR has a prestige system called the Legacy system. This is a second XP bar that goes under your normal XP bar that levels up across all your characters and allows you to unlock some really awesome new perks. SWTOR heavily rewards the player for making new alts and leveling them up. This adds another reason as to why you should experience all the 8 main storylines SWTOR has to offer. You'll essentially be leveling up your account as a whole. I personally love this system. I think it's amazing and is without a doubt one of the main reasons I continue to level new characters today. Being able to level your account and unlock new quality of life improvements over all your playthroughs almost has a roguelike element to it. Anyway, I do really love the Legacy system, and I think that is an important thing to touch on during the progression category. The graphics. The game is from 2011, so the graphics aren't super fantastic. All the footage you are seeing in the background during this entire video is the graphics cranked all the way up to the highest they can be, and if I didn't cap my FPS at 100, I would be averaging around 160 FPS. The art style is slightly stylized, I would say. They didn't go for total realism, which does let it age a bit better, but it does actually show its age a bit, especially during cutscenes and when you're looking through the landscape and you're seeing those 2D trees that are like 2 crisscross pieces of paper. They did recently update from a 32-bit client to 64-bit, so that might help newer systems run at higher resolutions. Some of the DLC planets are quite nice. You can see that they use more modern assets and technology to make them look a little bit nicer. Additionally, there are armor pieces in this game that you can craft or buy that are considered high-res and do have a bit more texture on them compared to some of the older armor they released 10 years ago. Overall, the graphics are okay, nothing to write home about, but they're not horrible by any means. The monetization. SWTOR has by far and away the best monetization system for any game I've ever played. And I do not mean that lightly. It is fantastic. This game is free to play right off the bat. Easily over 400 hours of content to do and explore for the price of $0. If you do choose to subscribe for 1 month, just 1 month, you unlock every DLC that is currently on the market forever. Yes, forever. You just own it. I subscribed for 1 month and now I own all the DLC forever for $15. What an amazing monetary system compared to something like World of Warcraft. It is beautiful. And it is one of the main reasons I give up on MMOs, specifically World of Warcraft, because of the pricing model. It's just not worth the money for me. It's just so refreshing to have a monetary system like this. If a new DLC comes out in a year or two and I would like to play it, all I need to do is resubscribe for 1 more month and that DLC gets added to my collection forever. DLC, to my knowledge, drops every year or two, so it's really an amazing deal. I cannot hype this monetization system up enough. There is quite an extensive microtransaction shop. Most items are cosmetic, either armor sets, housing items, mounts, etc. However, you can buy some items that do affect your in-game performance, like companions or legacy upgrades that are over the credit cap if you're a free-to-play player, like rocket boots, which are extremely useful. But 99% of the shop has no effect on other players and is mainly just for the player's enjoyment. So now we're going to touch on the one part of the monetization system that I think is predatory and I don't like, and I did touch on this in the progression, and it's that free-to-play players are locked in depending on what gear they can have. Dungeons in SWTOR are called flashpoints. You queue up with a random group, you do it, generally high XP and pretty good rewards. The best leveling gear you can generally get is purple, and purple items drop at a high frequency in flashpoints, which are the dungeons. If you are a free-to-play player, you cannot equip these items, which I talked about, right? Free-to-play players cannot equip purple and gold, which by far have the best flavor and best stats for all items in the entire game. You just can't. It's definitely predatory because you get to see all this awesome gear dropping that you could be using. But since you're not paying $15 a month, you can't. You just sit and you look at it in your inventory and say, wow, I wish I could equip this. This item seems so cool. Additionally, as I mentioned, the legendary items or the set pieces that are part of some really cool bonus once you equip all 5 pieces, you just can't. You're looking at your inventory, you can't use them. Additionally, all the raids, which in SWTOR are called operations, are locked for free-to-play players and you must pay to do them. I never got around to raiding in my 150 hours or so of playing, but I imagine that's a significant chunk of endgame content, so locking it behind a wall probably forces a couple of people to sign up for the subscription. So that was my in-depth review, and I suppose you could skip to this point if you'd like. Just quick recap, we're going to be going through the bad, the good, and the verdict of SWTOR in a much, much more condensed sense, but you're not going to get any of the details. Let's start with the bad. SWTOR has all the meat and potatoes of a fantastic MMORPG, but it lacks any seasoning. It has a phenomenal storyline and world, but lacks meaningful character progression. Weapons, gear, and accessories have zero personality. It's just about equipping the gear that has the highest number possible. There is not a single piece of gear that's name carries weight. No legendary helmet or sword that drops off a world boss that has a cool effect and that every player is hunting for. Gear is just numbers. With fast rotations and low damage compared to other MMOs, combat in SWTOR feels clunky and unsatisfying. If you choose to play for free, you'll be locked out of a majority of endgame content and restricted on gear you're allowed to craft and equip. Not to mention the fact that you'll never be able to afford anything in the marketplace and will be living on scraps due to inflation. You can't trade with your friends as a free-to-play player. You can't send or receive mail as a free-to-play player. You have less professions. You are capped to 10 weekly dungeons, etc. So if you're not seeing my point, if you don't subscribe, you are playing a single-player game. Free-to-play players generally in this game are barred from all social aspects of this MMORPG, which is quite detrimental to the player base, I personally feel. The good. SWTOR is an incredibly story-rich MMORPG that will keep you occupied for hundreds and hundreds of hours at zero cost. If you choose to subscribe for 1 month, you get to keep an additional 100 hours of DLC content forever. The world is diverse and expansive while still paying close attention to small details. There are monthly events running year-long, keeping the player base occupied and satisfied with rewards and achievements. Without question, you will also find a combat style that suits you to the T. There are dozens of different combat style specializations, allowing a player complete control when it comes to the playstyle and feel of the character. You will make decisions that will alter your character's storyline forever and permanently change the relationships you have with people around you. You are encouraged to create new characters and explore the world of SWTOR as many times as you can, because every time it will be different. The verdict. SWTOR is free, which means there's no monetary cost to try it. I would 100% suggest picking up the game and playing through one storyline to completion. Once you've completed a campaign for one of the 8 origins, you'll have a pretty decent understanding of how the game works, and you'll be able to make an educated decision if you should continue or not. And again, you can do all of this for $0 over the course of a week, over a month, over a year. It doesn't matter because there's free and there's no time value of your money here. However, I don't think SWTOR is an MMORPG. It's more like an online RPG in a shared world. If you pay for the sub, then it might be more leaning towards an MMORPG, I'll give you that. But the fact of the matter is it's basically a solo game if you choose to play for free. You can still play with friends, but most of the trading and events and anything endgame is restricted to subs. The graphics are a little outdated, but the storytelling and world building makes up for it tenfold. I plan to continue playing SWTOR and finish up all the DLC before hopping over to a new MMO, but that's just me. It is a fantastic game, and I highly recommend you play it at least once. That is my review of SWTOR as a new player. If you're a veteran and have played for a while, comment down below and let me know what you thought of my opinion. Did I start to play SWTOR at a bad time? Was there a golden age for the game a couple years back that I would have enjoyed more? There's still a lot I want to learn about the game, but I thought a new player's perspective might be a valuable insight for the community, especially because it's approaching, 12 years old. Regardless, thank you very much for watching, and this was Frostbreak, and I hope to see you in the next one.